Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, May 12th, 2025. I'm Gary Sarkoff. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is on his way to the Middle East this afternoon. He's scheduled to visit Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The trip comes as the president defended his decision to accept a luxury jet from the Qatari royal family. He said he plans to use that jet as a new version of Air Force One. Before he left, the president signed an executive order that aims to cut prescription drug costs. We'll hear from him on both issues coming up. On Capitol Hill, House Republicans have released more of their tax plan. It calls for extending the 2017 tax cuts and tightening Medicaid benefits. Republican leaders say they hope to combine it with the parts of their plan that were released over the weekend and then formally take it all up tomorrow in the Ways and Means Committee. House leadership says they still think they can get all of this done and over to the Senate by Memorial Day and on the president's desk by the 4th of July, but disagreements still persist on tax rates and Medicaid cuts. We'll break it down coming up. And Hamas terrorists have released Israeli-American Edan Alexander after more than 19 months in captivity. The Washington Post says the release is the result of direct talks between the U.S. and Hamas in recent days. Edan Alexander is a 21-year-old Israeli military soldier. The Red Cross confirmed he was in their custody Monday evening local time and then moved to Israeli military custody and flown to a facility in southern Israel for medical tests and to reunite with his family. He is the last American thought to be held by Hamas, who kidnapped him on October 7th, 2023, along with 250 others. Well, we'll start at the White House and the president taking questions on that gift from Qatar.
Has Qatar asked for anything in exchange for that $400 million luxury jumbo jet? And how can the American people be so sure that they will not in the future?
Well, I think what happens with the plane is that, we're very disappointed that it's taking Boeing so long to build a new Air Force One. We have an Air Force One that's 40 years old. And if you take a look at that compared to the new plane of the equivalent, stature at the time, it's not even the same ballgame. You look at some of the Arab countries and the planes they have parked alongside of the United States of America plane. It's like from a different planet. And it's close to 40 years old, might be more than 40 years old now. And we, when I first came in, I signed an order to get it built. I took it over from the Obama administration. They had originally agreed. I got the price down much lower. And then when the election didn't exactly work out the way that it should have, a lot of work was not done on the plane because a lot of people didn't know. They made change orders that were so stupid, so ridiculous. And it ended up being a total mess, a real mess. And when I came back, I said, by the way, what's going on with the Boeings that are coming in? Well, sir, they're way behind. And they're way behind. They were way behind. Another mess that I inherited from Biden. And it's going to be a while before we get them. And I think Qatar, who has really, we've helped them a lot over the years in terms of security and safety. I think they, and very, very nicely, and I have a lot of respect for the leadership and for the leader, Qatar. And I think they knew about it because they buy Boeings. They buy a lot of Boeings. And they knew about it. And they said, we would like to do something. And if we can get a 747 as a contribution to our Defense Department to use during a couple of years while they're building the other ones. I think that was a very nice gesture. Now, I could be a stupid person and say, oh, no, we don't want a free plane. We give free things out. We'll take one, too. And it helps us out because, again, we're talking about we have 40-year-old aircraft. The money we spend, the maintenance we spend on those planes to keep them tippy-top is astronomical. You wouldn't even believe it. So I think it's a great gesture from Qatar. I appreciate it very much. I would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer. I mean, I could be a stupid person and say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane. But I thought it was a great gesture. And I think it was a gesture because of the fact that we have helped and continue to, we will continue to, all of those countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar and others, we keep them safe. If it wasn't for us, they probably wouldn't exist right now. And I think this was just a gesture of good faith. And I don't get it. Someday it'll be like Ronald Reagan. They decommission them. You know, they get to a certain age, they decommission them. It'll go to my library. They're talking about going to my library in years out. But I thought it was a great gesture. And it's something that was done by Ronald Reagan. They actually decommissioned the plane, and he put it in his library. And it actually has made the library, I think, a Boeing 707. It's actually made the library more successful. So it was good.
Do you plan to use the plane after you leave office?
No, I don't. No, it would go directly to the library after I leave office. I wouldn't be using it. No.
Punchbowl News writing today that Senate Foreign Relations Democrat Chris Murphy says he'll object to proposed arms sales to both Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Punchbowl quoting Senator Murphy saying Donald Trump is selling off America's foreign policy and national security to the highest bidder and isn't even bothering to cover it up. Any deal he strikes on this trip can be called into question based on Trump's personal conflicts of interest. And Punchbowl also saying Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer described the jet arrangement as, quote, bribery and, quote, premium foreign influence. And that in addition to the gift from Qatar, Punchbowl reporting that it recently revealed that the United Arab Emirates is pouring $2 billion into the president's cryptocurrency venture. Hawaii Democratic Senator Brian Schatz said he plans to introduce a resolution today that condemns the gift transfer. And as we said, this all came up at a White House executive order signing on drug prices. USA Today reporting that today's order builds on a similar policy the president favored in his first term by not just limiting it to certain drugs under Medicare, but also including drugs available under Medicaid and private sector insurance. Here's more from the president on his executive order and the gift from Qatar.
Mr. President, what is Mr.
Price controls?
Say it.
How do you respond to the fact that this?
It's not price control. No. What was price control is before. If you want to talk about price control, is what they were doing. They were making us pay. They set a price, and they said, "Here's what we're going to pay, and anything else charge America." Because at that time they had a very stupid president, and it really went crazy during the last 4 years. And remember this, the Democrats are the ones that allowed this to happen. They were the ones that were the protector of this pricing system. And I think it's going to be very hard. You'll have to ask Democrats, are they going to vote against the one great, big, beautiful deal that's being negotiated now, tax cuts, etc., when now on top of the tax cuts and regulation cuts, all the things, now you're going to say that the price of your medicine is going down by 60, 70, 80%. You're going to vote against it? I think a lot of Democrats are going to be forced to do something that their leaders are going to beg them not to do, and that's vote for the bill. I don't see how they can vote against it. How can they vote against it when drug prices, drugs and pharmaceuticals are going to be down 70, 80%? It's going to be very interesting.
Mr. President, what do you say to people who view that luxury jet as a personal gift to you? Why not leave it behind?
You're ABC fake news, right?
Why not?
It's only ABC. Well, a few of you would. Let me tell you, you should be embarrassed asking that question. They're giving us a free jet. I could say, no, don't give us. I want to pay you $1 billion or $400 million or whatever it is. Or I could say, thank you very much. You know, there was an old golfer named Sam Snead. Did you ever hear of him? He won 82 tournaments. He was a great golfer. And he had a motto: when they give you a putt, you say, thank you very much. You pick up your ball and you walk to the next hole. A lot of people are stupid. They say, no, I insist on putting it. And then they putt it and they miss it. And their partner gets angry at them. You know what? Remember that, Sam Snead. When they give you a putt, you pick it up and you walk to the next hole and you say, thank you very much.
Respectfully, sir, as a businessman, some people may look at this and say, have you ever been given a gift worth millions of dollars and then not received anything?
It's not a gift to me, it's a gift to the Department of Defense. And you should know better, because you've been embarrassed enough, and so has your network. Your network is a disaster. ABC is a disaster. Here is the bill. Bobby, come on over here. Now you're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars.
The president's 4-day trip will take him to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. On this morning's Washington Journal, Brett Samuels, White House reporter from The Hill, talked about why it's significant that the president chose the Middle East for his first international trip.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and we should note that his first foreign trip during his first term was also to Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. So some symmetry there, but certainly I think a driving factor here is that sort of business investment, financial component. Certainly, this president ran on sort of restoring the economy, bringing investment back to the United States. I think that's going to be a key part of this. He'd already touted sort of investments from the Saudis earlier on in his second term, I should say. So certainly, I think that will be that's sort of the driving message here, and that's why he's going to these nations as his first sort of official foreign trip, is because the White House wants to tout these sort of investment initiatives, these efforts to bring more investment into the United States.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posting about the president's trip today. President Zelensky is in Istanbul attending peace talks with Russia. He posted on X, quote, "All of us in Ukraine would appreciate it if President Trump could be there with us at this meeting in Turkey. This is the right idea. We can change a lot." The president said that going to Istanbul was a possibility. And from the Associated Press, stocks rallied today after China and the U.S. announced a 90-day truce in their trade war. Each of the world's two largest economies agreed to take down temporarily most of its tariffs against the other, which economists had warned could start a recession and create shortages on U.S. store shelves. The S&P 500 shot up 3.33%. Now it is back within 5% of its all-time high set back in February, and back above where it was on April 2nd when President Trump announced the tariffs. You can see all of today's White House event at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Edan? אתה בחוץ, נשמה שלי, אתה בחוץ. זהו, אני פה, אני מחכה לך. הכל טוב, אתה בסדר, אתה מוגן, אתה בבית. הכל טוב, תן בראש, אתה חזק, עוד מעט נפגשים. אוהבת אותך, נשמה שלי, אוהבת אותך. יאללה, אני רוצה לראות אותך, קדימה. They just released a photo of you. You look unbelievable. Wow. You look beautiful. I love you so much. אתה נראה מדהים. I love you, and I'm going to see you, soon. Very soon.
That is the sound of Yael Alexander talking to her son Edan on the phone for the first time following his release from Hamas custody. The terrorist group held him for 584 days. Edan Alexander is believed to have been the last living American hostage held by Hamas. He was kidnapped near the Gaza border on October 7th, 2023, along with 250 others. He was photographed wearing a black Adidas T-shirt and a baseball cap during his handover to the Red Cross. And a couple of hours ago, the Israeli military released a picture of him with his family in a Tel Aviv hospital. Now to Capitol Hill, where this week House Republicans will begin marking up their budget reconciliation bill. CNN's Haley Talbot posting on X today that a group of House Republicans met with Ways and Means Committee members this morning about the so-called state and local tax or SALT deduction. Politico reporting that the latest House Ways and Means proposal includes a $30,000 cap on SALT deductions. The Hill's congressional reporter Michael Schnell reporting this afternoon that New York Republican Nick LaLota says he's still, quote, a hell no on this bill. Representative LaLota has expressed support for a $62,000 cap on single tax filers and a $124,000 cap for joint filers on this SALT deduction. With more, here's NBC News senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong from this morning's Washington Journal.
What's happening is that Republicans from blue states, high-tech states, have been fighting to raise the cap level of what we call SALT, the state and local tax deduction. This is the amount of money that families in these areas can deduct from their federal tax bill from their state and local taxes. And so moderate Republicans have been fighting to raise that cap threshold from 10,000, the current level, significantly higher. We've heard numbers talked about 30,000, thresholds. We've heard young Kim, a Republican from California, throw out a number as high as $62,000. And so right now there's a significant fight in the party over how high they're going to raise the SALT cap.
And without doing anything, if they don't touch that cap, it's going to expire, correct?
That's right. It will expire at the end of this year. Yes.
They can go back to what they had.
Right. That is the leverage that these SALT caucus Republicans have over the broader Republican caucus. If nothing happens, if they don't come to some sort of agreement, and there's going to be meetings starting today in the Speaker's office with the critical SALT caucus members, then that SALT cap will expire, and it will revert back to how it always had been, which was sort of an unlimited amount that people could deduct from their federal tax from the state and local tax. And so, this is really a critical piece of Jason Smith's tax bill. They're saving the hardest part for last.
NBC senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong on this morning's Washington Journal, and we heard him refer to Jason Smith there. He is the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. The committee is scheduled to start their work tomorrow. Also tomorrow, the House Energy and Commerce Committee will begin their budget work. That will include changes to Medicaid. Scott Wong talked about ongoing Republican disagreements there.
Obviously, moderates like Don Bacon of Nebraska, people who are facing tough elections, Mike Lawler of New York, young Kim of California, who are facing very, very tough elections from Democrats, don't want to see Medicaid cut too deeply. They believe that there should be reforms, but they don't want to see millions and millions of Americans losing their health coverage. And what the Democrats have put out there is an analysis by the Congressional Budget Office that shows that under this plan by the ENC committee, that there would be millions of Americans. In fact, I think more than 13 million Americans, according to the CBO, over the next decade would lose their health coverage because of changes to Obamacare in this plan, and as well as cuts to Medicaid.
And from reporting this morning from outlets covering Capitol Hill, including the Wall Street Journal, the cuts to Medicaid come from adding work requirements and more frequent eligibility checks. That is where they're looking at making cuts. The Energy and Commerce Chair, Brett Guthrie, says these aren't cuts. This is the slowing of Medicaid because it's going to cost more than $1 trillion a year in the next decade if lawmakers don't rein it in.
Yeah, you mentioned work requirements. They're calling it something else. They're calling it community engagement requirements. And what that essentially means is that able-bodied adults who receive Medicaid would need to, under this new plan, prove that they are contributing in some way, whether that is through work, which would be working 80 hours per month, demonstrating that they're taking education courses or going through work programs, as well as community service. They could be giving 80 hours of community service per month as well. And so they're sort of broadening out this idea of work requirements to something called community engagement requirements, but that's going to be a significant change. That definitely jumped out at me.
NBC News senior congressional correspondent Scott Wong on Washington Journal this morning. You can see all of that segment and our week ahead look in Congress at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. House members will be back on the floor tomorrow at noon Eastern for general speeches. They'll start legislative work at 2 p.m. Eastern, then have votes scheduled for 6:30 p.m. Eastern. On their agenda, a bill that expands the rights of qualified law enforcement officers, both active and retired, to carry concealed firearms in more locations, including school zones, national parks, and certain federal facilities. Also bills on the purchasing of police service weapons and officer safety and wellness. The Senate came back to work today. They're working on President Trump's executive nominations with a vote scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time on whether to limit debate on Monica Crowley to be chief of protocol. As always, you can watch the Senate live on C-SPAN 2, the House on C-SPAN, and full coverage at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now video app. You're listening to Washington Today.
McCarthyism, Whittaker Chambers, Alger Hiss, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Paul Robeson, House Un-American Activities Committee, the Smith Act, the Hollywood 10, the Joint Anti-Fascist Committee, the Truman Loyalty Program, the Blacklist, book burning, and communism. All subjects of controversy during the 30s, 40s, and 50s here in the United States. Clay Risen, a reporter and editor at the New York Times, has a fresh look at all this in his book, Red Scare. Mr. Risen writes in his preface that his grandfather was a career FBI agent who joined the Bureau during World War II, and he recounted stories of implementing loyalty tests for the federal government in the late 1940s.
Author Clay Risen with his book Red Scare, Blacklists, McCarthyism, and the Making of Modern America on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host, Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. From ABC7NY.com, airline officials are scheduled to meet with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy in Washington on Wednesday about the situation at Newark Liberty Airport in New Jersey. That meeting will likely determine how many flights will originate at Newark for the rest of the summer. 40 flights were canceled this afternoon. Secretary Duffy said at a news conference today that it's not known yet how many flights will be cut or how long the reductions will last. He also talked about the tracking and communications issues the airport has been dealing with.
This system is so old that even if you have high-speed fiber information coming in to a TRACON or a tower, the equipment that we use is so old, the information has to be slowed down. It comes in too fast. It has to go at the speed of copper wires. So again, we have two issues: the reliability of the telecom, but also the old equipment that we're using paired together are causing a lot of issues in the system. So let's talk about what the Trump administration is doing moving forward to fix the problems that were left to us from the Biden Buttigieg administration. Now, while these temporary software fixes that I mentioned earlier that worked on Sunday morning should prevent future outages, the core issue is the telecommunication lines. Here's what we're doing to fix the telecom. One, I'll be requesting an OIG investigation into the failures of the last administration and the decisions that were made to move the TRACON from N90 in New York down to Philadelphia, and the work that was done to plan for this move and making sure that the lines were hardened. The FAA today is assembling a tiger team of experts to fully fast-track the fixes that we've identified need to be done to make sure this works. The FAA has replaced copper lines with fiber lines at Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia. That work is done. It was done in the last couple weeks. However, it's going to take another week or two to be testing those two lines before we flip the switch and make them live.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy speaking to reporters earlier today. He said that he also plans to raise the mandatory retirement age for air traffic controllers from 56 to 61 and offer a 20% upfront bonus to stay on the job. That's in response to a labor shortage of air traffic controllers of about 3,000 people. You can see all of his comments at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Also today, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, the Democrat, shared more on his details about his trip last month to El Salvador. He was there to visit Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was deported there after what Trump administration officials said in court documents was an administrative error. Senator Van Hollen called the Abrego Garcia case a critical moment for this country, and he continued to call on the Trump administration to follow the Supreme Court's order to facilitate his return to the U.S. He also talked about how the White House and the Salvadoran government are talking about the case.
On the U.S. side, you just have this constant flood of information, disinformation on social media, trying to change the subject in this case, right? Trying to make it all about fighting gang violence. As I've said, we can fight gang violence without suspending the Constitution of the United States. And in fact, in this region, back in the early 2000s, I headed up an anti-gang regional task force. But we should not just let them spew this information and change the subject. The judge in this case has said very clearly that the administration has provided, quote, no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other terrorist activity, end of quote. So my response to them on the social media side and the information is put up or shut up in court, right? That's where people provide 100%. Testimony under oath. Now, the government of El Salvador has become complicit in this scheme. And essentially, they are being paid by the United States to take people like Abrego Garcia in violation of his constitutional rights. So when I showed up in El Salvador, I did meet with the vice president, okay? And I asked the vice president if I could meet with Abrego Garcia. He said no. I also asked for his release, and that's where he said, and I wrote to Donald Trump, President Trump, about this. He told me that, again, the only reason they were holding him was not because they had any charges against him. The government of El Salvador has no charges against him. They're holding him solely because they're being paid by the U.S. government. And they are therefore complicit in this scheme. They then tried to, I then the next day when they refused to let me see him, I got in a car with some others, including the lawyer for his wife, Jennifer, and we tried to go to the prison, CCOT. And we were about a couple kilometers away when they'd set up a checkpoint. And soldiers were there and waved the car to the side of the road. And we got out. We had a conversation. They said they'd been ordered not to let me proceed, to see Abrego Garcia. I said, do you know how he's doing? They said, we don't know. We don't care. Essentially, we have our orders. So I went back to my hotel. I did a press conference with a lot of local press and made the point that El Salvador was violating international law, because international law requires that prisoners at least have access to their lawyer or somebody in the outside world, and there've been nothing before, and by the way, since I met, nothing since. So that, I think, raised the temperature in the country, and I got a phone call a little later that day, and that's when I was able to meet with them. They relented. They did try to set up, I'll talk about, they tried to make it look like a tropical paradise. They wanted us to meet by the pool, by the way. We said no. They then staged these, margaritas, which, the right wing folks have just sort of taken hook, line, and sinker. It's a big lie, but the idea was to deceive people into thinking that, here was Abrego Garcia enjoying himself in a tropical paradise when he had just been, he'd been in the most notorious prison. So don't be deceived, but you've got a lot of misinformation going on to try to change the subject away from due process, Constitution.
Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen at the Center for American Progress. Another topic at today's event, the human rights situation in El Salvador, and senior White House advisor Stephen Miller's recent comments that the Trump administration is looking into suspending habeas corpus rights.
It just shows what lengths this administration will go to. You have the president saying he doesn't know if he's bound by the Constitution, and you have Steve Miller, right, saying that they're considering suspending habeas corpus, suspending the Constitution in the United States of America, essentially declaring martial law in the United States of America. And that should be a wake-up call, right, to everybody, conservatives, liberals, everybody in the middle, about what is in their minds, at least Steve Miller's mind, and he seems to have an awful lot of influence on Donald Trump. Okay, so that's one thing. There's a reason that Trump picked Bukele to be his partner in this. It's because you have seen this sort of great clampdown on human rights in El Salvador. Now, when I met with the Vice President of El Salvador, I did make clear that we have common cause on one thing. We agree that we should be fighting gang violence, MS-13. I talked about the efforts that I led in this Washington region back in the early 2000s. But you can fight gang violence without trampling over human rights and essentially locking up people without their having any due process. That's what Donald Trump's trying to do here. That's what Bukele has done in El Salvador. And that's why you have CCOT being this sort of notorious prison. If you read the most recent State Department human rights report about prisons in El Salvador, they essentially talk about the very credible evidence of torture, and they go in at some length. This is the prison where you taxpayers, American taxpayers, are sending their money in order to participate in the scheme to deny people their due process rights. So Senator Kaine and I did file a resolution, 502B it's called, anyway, and it could come up on the Senate floor as early as this week. And essentially, it will give us an opportunity to have a discussion and a vote on the issues of due process of the Constitution here, but also highlight the lengths to which Bukele's government has gone in order to be complicit. I call it the cash for collusion scheme.
Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen at the Center for American Progress. You can see all of his comments at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now. And Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts was at Georgetown University today. He was speaking to law students. And in part of the discussion, he talked about the legacy of Supreme Court Justice David Souter, who passed away on May 8th at age 85. He said the late justice was, quote, extremely thoughtful in his approach to his work.
You know, it's interesting. I do think uncommon wisdom but also kindness, which is not always a common combination. He was extremely thoughtful. Any kind of certain tragedy or difficulty in your life, or even pleasant things, you would get a note from him. Beautiful calligraphy type handwriting, and not just, sorry for your loss, whatever, but really quite thoughtful, both sides of the card, and sometimes more about, similar experiences in his life, and, this and that. I mean, the kind of thing that you save. I mean, I have a nice collection of his things, and very, very thoughtful, and he was very kind in that way. I remember being very surprised when he came in and told me that he was going to leave, to retire. I said, well, David, you're in perfect health, mental acuity. Why would you want to leave? And it was a good lesson in kind of perspective. He said, well, I've been here, almost 20 years. I think I've made, my contribution, and I just want to get back to New Hampshire and back to reading some good books, which is, there aren't many people who would have that kind of perspective. Including myself. I wouldn't claim to have that kind of view, but sort of a very good, balanced way of looking at all of it. And as we read a letter from the court to a departing colleague, and it was just that, part of it was he wanted to leave, white marble for the White Mountains. And he did. That's what he wanted to do, and so he did it, and kind of certainly very unconventional in that respect.
Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts speaking to students at Georgetown University Law Center. All of that event is available to see at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast, and it's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more of the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterhoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.